Great, and I just want to say welcome. I'm Ben Simons. I'm the director of the Academy Art Museum, and I'm joined by Mevesh Lelich, who's our curator at the Academy Art Museum, and Antonio McAfee, who's our artist in residence for 2020. Hello, Antonio, coming to us from Baltimore. I'm on the Eastern Shore, and Mevesh is in DC, so we're pretty widely represented here. And this is the second in our Zoom series. We visited with Emily Lombardo, who was our first artist in residence 2 weeks ago. That was a lot of fun, and we're continuing this series. Mevesh will be your host today and leading the conversation with Antonio. I just wanted to point you to our Vimeo page, which will be the home of our video content, including this live Zoom, which will become a recording and live on our Vimeo page after that. And also that we're just really excited to reconnect with Antonio. We first met you because you were the winner of our very first national juried photography show in 2018. That was juried by Sarah Stolfa of the Philadelphia Photo Arts Center, and you were the top place winner. And we met you and then invited you to become an artist in residence this year. And then, of course, we had all our plans in place, and things changed. COVID happened, but we're going forward, and you'll hear more from Mevesh about some of our timing and plans to have your exhibition and to have your residency as well. So it's great to be with you, Antonio. And Mevesh, you want to give us a little background about his work and the show coming up?
Yeah, Antonio is a Baltimore-based and Baltimore-raised artist. He received his BFA from the Corcoran School of Art in DC, and then his MFA from the University of Pennsylvania. He also holds a postgraduate diploma in arts and culture management from the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa. He has exhibited recently at the University of Maryland College Park Stamp Gallery, UMBC's Kuhn Library Gallery, George Washington University's Gallery 102, Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., the Walters Museum in Baltimore, and the Academy Art Museum. He was named finalist at the 93rd Print Center Annual in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and he received, as Ben pointed out, the Best in Show Award at the photography exhibition at the Academy Art Museum. We're very excited and looking forward to when we can reopen again and celebrate his work in a solo exhibition titled Legacy. And yeah, Antonio, did I miss anything? I'm sure I missed lots, but
Yeah. But it's cool. I mean, we don't have to do all that. It's cool. Yeah, shout out to all my friends out there. I know I have some friends from Wits or from Joburg, really, out there watching. I'm on my phone, so I'm not gonna interact with them to only do this. So that's with the knowledge on my people out there.
great.
Oh, you want me to get it going? You ready? Or you have any questions?
We're ready. I think we'll start with your studio, the UMBC show. If you want to give us an overview of the works behind you.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, should I move the camera closer?
Yeah.
Okay. I just picked a selection of some of my 3D work, which was the subject of my show at UMBC, Special Collections Cohen Gallery. So for that show, it was focused on my 3D works, my stereoscopic works, up through the layers part 1 of this big piece here, which was subject to my first solo show, actually. Let's see here. I'll keep it like this. Let's see if I can just come closer. But let me know if it's too confusing or it's too jerky or anything like that. There we go. I can bring prints for it too. It needs to be in the slideshow too. The goal for this work through the layers, I was taking photographs from Small Nation of People exhibition in 1900 from the Paris World Expo that Du Bois and Thomas Callaway was putting together to represent the United States. And the exhibition was a survey of middle-class African Americans in Georgia from data from 1850 to 1899. And I've been really preoccupied by remaking these studio portraits, 363 of them. in the series, give or take. And I wanted to add, my own process and curiosities in photography and portraiture, and talking about who controls representation and that controls the dialogue of a certain demographic of people. And I kind of want to make the relationship between the people photographed and the viewers more curious. I want to add more doubt to it. I want the viewer coming in with skepticism, but understanding that these images are manipulated and intended for the viewer's vision to be altered and controlled by this. And I kind of wanted to make that apparent too, and open up and make unstable the relationship between the portrait and the photograph, and to prevent any kind of conclusions necessarily, kind of open up, add more curiosity, and urge people to kind of dig a little bit more. Some of the strategies I used for that was on the red and blue stereoscopic 3D images techniques. Closer image of one. So I took a black and white image, and in Photoshop and channels, made a copy, and one copy is red, one copy is blue. Then I flipped them horizontally, and I started to overlap them, and this gives me like this duplication of like a third eye. These effects that kind of appear out of there based on what they're wearing or how they look. When the viewer puts 3D glasses on, it alters the way they see the image. So some things will appear, some things would disappear, some things would jump out as a proper 3D image. But also after you look at these images with the glasses, 36 to a minute, and you look away at that white wall, for example, you'll see the after image, the reverse of it. And that came to me through studying Bo Lotto, who's a neuroscientist. He studies perception, and he posed a question early in one of his talks, or a statement rather, is that we evolved to see based on survival and not based on accuracy. So that got me really curious about, so what does that mean for understanding an image and applying meaning to an image? And if it's portraiture, what does that mean for applying meaning to a certain individual or demographic and how we understand them? But in regards to the after image, that also comes from this book called Techniques of the Observer, Modernity and Vision of 19th Century. That's correct. Jonathan Kari, who I believe was at Columbia University where he teaches. But he talks about after images and how that is the brain and the eye creating an image, internalizing an image and producing an image simultaneously based on that effect. So one, it's like a interpretation of the brain, obviously. But also it activates the viewer, making participants in the image in itself and its meaning and its effect. So I really thought that was interesting how we can internalize something and kind of project back based on what we're taking in. So the 3D effect induces that. This piece here, I'll try my best to.
Antonio, do you want us to go to the slide version of these, and you can?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Mm-hmm. I started out presenting these at 24 by 36s prints, framed or just magnets without a frame. Recently, I've been showing these with photo text or LexJet, which is a substrate that's an adhesive, but also takes an inch of ink. So I'm printing these now around 40 by 50 inches and directly onto the wall. I've also shown a wallpaper with these in my first iteration of showing these for my first solo show, where the wallpaper was also a 3D effect with the images on top of them. So person's perception of vision and sense was totally overwhelmed. And it's so curious that this was the subject of my first solo show, because this 3D stereoscopic work was a side project. I used to do black and white manipulations. We'll get to some of my transfer work when I'm peeling ink off inkjet prints and transfer the medium and doing collages and all these other things. So I do have a variety. I work on a variety of work and techniques simultaneously. Though there are periods when I focus on one at a time, to kind of direct myself. But I do have quite a few things going on in the studio simultaneously. I feel it's kind of constructed the work at a certain pace for me to stay constructive. I can't be like too slow or too much going on. It has to be like a certain balance of good amount of work, keep my momentum like thriving,
Antonio, you talk about the idea of intersubjective time in your work in a recent interview, and how that affects the way a viewer might connect to an image. Can you talk a little bit about how that influences this body of work and others?
Yeah, that influences really like the way I think. I tend to bounce back and forth to try and travel quite a bit. So for this image right here, the gym. So for the Through the Layers show at UMBC, one, it showed the original series that was subject to my first solo show. But two, it also showed additional work I made responding to the works collection from the photography collection of UMBC's Specials collection. Ronald Rooks is a Maryland entrepreneur. He spent years collecting African-American vernacular photography starting around the Civil War, pre-Civil War, Civil War, and after. The interesting thing about his series, as opposed to the Du Bois one I was working with, is that there's much more personal information and connotations in these images. Many of these images are titled Mother and Son, or so-and-so's aunt. Robert Smalls, the politician, is listed in there. Heron Revels, the politician, was also depicted in there. And I guess the material part of it. So for this particular one, it was really interesting because now I could do more research into the individuals and kind of suss that out and wrestle with that. But I'm still working on this collection as well, this collection a little bit. Versus the Du Bois one, where these figures were shown anonymously. So I tend to go back and forth quite a bit to history to understand kind of how things began or how ideas may start out or persist, and to help understand where we are now. And that comes from the intersubjective time statement comes from a Lucid Apart article, a diary in context, a relationship with an image. The title is somewhere around there. And towards the end of that, she talks about the article in itself is different stages, 3 stages of how her relationship with the photograph evolved. Started from first just liking an image aesthetically. Did she research the photographer and got into the context of that? Did she research the family being depicted in the photograph? An indigenous family, so she got that context too. And towards the end of it, she had a whole new understanding and relationship to it. And despite not being a photographer, not being an indigenous person, and being 100 years away, she still was able to develop a relationship with this photograph that evolved over time and through digging and research. And that all comes from principles and practice of anthropology. So that's a framework in which that helps me understand being really absorbed into history and people's biographies and learning particular details and events that influences movements that impact today. One of the things I'm working on recently is talking about domestic workers. And the core of that is 1881 Atlanta washerwomen's strike. And that spawned, the success of that spawned other laborers and industries going on strike as well. Then I'm doing the research now with regarding CASA and their advocacy for domestic workers in the national legislation that they're trying to pull through And the issues you look at from 1881 to now are the exact same. It's lack of respect and acknowledgement of the security that domestic workers need. I just got word today, I was talking to Lauren Adams, is that many of them are kind of excluded from unemployment benefits that are happening today. So it just kind of goes back and forth, and it's sad these things are still persisting in such a similar manner, but it provides context of why things are the way they are, how they started out, and strategies to dismantle this stuff.
Antonio, you're such a student of the Reconstruction period and how important that was in the formation of identity and images of identity. And you say that there are a lot of parallels with your approach now, and there's sort of a back and forth that goes on in your methodology and your outlook. I guess that's not a question. It's just interesting that the Reconstruction is such an important framework for you.
Yeah, it is. It started with the Du Bois stuff, and then I started to understand contexts like what was happening before and after that. It just blossomed, and it became very apparent that a Reconstruction was a very pivotal time in the direction this country was going to go. And it stuck with me. I can't really let it go. You have another image you want to show? There you go. Yeah, the magician. Yeah. Okay, we can see it for a second. Yeah. So, I mean, the question of how to deal with the free blacks is a pivotal one. It really sparked like how they were going to address labor, black people, various incomes and resources, political power. It really kind of showed me that a lot of things persisted at that period that still persist today. We were talking, I think previously, about the 1870 economic crisis. And one thing that's curious to me when some people who, well, let me just speak directly. So, some black people who support Republicans today, one of the comments that comes up often, is that Republicans freed the slaves and all these other things. But what happened in the 1870s was that when economic crisis happened, that helped curb enthusiasm support for Reconstruction, and especially black citizens. Like the National Guard would leave Georgia and go to other places and stop protecting these freed peoples, work with the Free People Bureau. So after the economic crisis in 1870, politicians and corporations really started to go into politics. And that really, in my opinion, shaped the federal government, and we're still in that trend today. So I don't really, after learning that, I move away from the flip of where Democrats and Republicans at that period, and I kind of focus on the implementation of corporations and upper classes into politics. And that really started to shape things.
Antonio, because of the nature of this work, you must be looking at so many images and sifting through so many different archives. How do you pick which ones become your work?
It has to deal with a certain era. It has to deal with, it all evolves around the Du Bois exhibition. It all revolves around the work they were doing and the data they collect from 1850 to 1899, the show in 1900.
And that's in the Library of Congress.
It's in the Daniel Murray collection, Library of Congress. You can turn the video on me. I think I'm talking a lot and just showing that image. I'll come back and explain this magician image in a second. But there you go. So it's at the Daniel Murray collection in the Library of Congress. First Black librarian at the Library of Congress who worked on an exhibition with Du Bois. That's how I ended up there. I think he knew Thomas Calloway, actually, who had a hand in politics and was a lawyer. He did a lot of moving and shaking at that time. He got Du Bois enlisted. So that's how it kind of ended up at the Library of Congress, in the Daniel Murray collection, who in himself started out as an assistant and moved up to work himself to be a librarian. It all revolves around more or less the Reconstruction period and Du Bois, to understand that context. And this all started about my growing up in middle class and taking it and not thinking it was really special or unique. It was kind of mundane to me. But as I started to grow up and started to want those things for myself, a house, and thinking about self-sufficiency a lot, and having a family, became very curious and used my curiosity as an instruction manual to how do I ascend to that too. So I kind of look back. I interviewed my grandfather when I first started this work. I spent a lot of time with my father, talking to him. Years later, to contemporary times like now, I interviewed my mom and my grandmother who worked for the Urban League with finances. So it was all a search within myself to figure out how my people, how my family moved up economically and socially. And it became apparent to me, or I just chose to use as a device, that the Du Bois exhibition and his research of middle-class Blacks at that period could provide some answers and insights to access to places to live and jobs that they had, and different policies that were affecting them that enabled or hindered them to move up socially and economically. I started to see a lot of parallels though, so I just got stuck there, you know. And it kind of revealed so many things to me, especially the era regarding where the direction of the country was going to go after the Civil War and during Reconstruction, that I became invested in just kind of understanding that context more. Because as I said before, the Du Bois exhibition is quite, it's specific. It is, you know, Georgia and middle-class people, and there's a lot of stats in talking about different jobs they had and income fluxes and all these different things and appliances, and really detailed charts regarding hourly wages and someone's responsibility. But looking at these charts and seeing data from, you know, 1850, 1870, see rise and the fall of income or property owned. I started to be curious of what caused these rises and falls. So then I had to go outside the exhibition and understand what was the workforce like. So that led me to the domestic workers, and that helped increase the wages of people. So they helped their lives improve, you know, and get better property. So all these little minute things added so much context to what I was seeing and understanding. So I just kept with it and stuck around it. So I pick it based on if it's going to feed that initial MO of understanding this time period and what these images represent, and how I could throw a wrench in people's expectations of photographs and portraiture, and not take it for granted and question all this stuff. Especially nowadays, we're eventually going to get to contemporary times and what's happening this week, and this week going all the way back to the beginning of this country. So the disseminative information, and how do we, and trusting images and reporters, people in political power and various powers to disseminate information, is very important to be scrupulous. And I just don't, for some reason, I preoccupied by people taking images for granted, and assuming they know something about a person without really being, you know, invested like they should. So I'm just preoccupied with throwing a wrench in this relationship and figuring out how to encourage people to do more, you know, or just come in already skeptical and wanting more information, you know.
Absolutely. And these themes of who gets represented and who gets to represent them through photography and makes meaning continues in your following series, some of which make up the body of the Legacy exhibition here at the Academy, opening August 1st. Should we move on to that body of work?
Yeah, you sure can. And the slideshow, and I'll show some of the stuff in my studio. But yeah. Yeah. Okay, stop here for a second. Can you go back to the magician one? I did say I was going to explain this one. So this one is from the Rooks collection, from Ronald Rooks. In the original photograph, I believe the guy is holding like a bracelet or like a chain. I actually thought it was like handcuffs. I always imagined it being handcuffs when I started to duplicate this image and flipping and stuff like that. So in my mind, he's doing like a magician trick of the hand with the handcuffs. He's kind of like breaking out of it. So that's why I call it magician. And he's repeated a lot. I use some of these people as surrogates for myself in the imaginative sense for these photographs. So the magician is just me. And in the early series of the Dwarves work, it's also the trickster as well. And that comes from African folklore, often articulated as Nancy the Spider, which is a shapeshifter, but they use rules of a society or a community. It gets itself, subverts them for its own means. So inherently think of Black people as resistors and, you know, fighters and just very intelligent people. It's like you have to find multiple strategies to survive. You know, you have to kind of understand the context, understand my context of where I'm in and what rules are people abiding to, and if those rules apply to me or if those rules apply unjustly, how do I go around it to do what I need to do? So the people like the magician and trickster are just symbolic of kind of disrupting on, you know, the systems that may or may not be for you, but find your own way through that, find your own strategies to survive and social you know, mobility upwards from there. So imagine since these figures have immense abilities, like the X-Men. I pull up from, like, you know, all my favorite comics is like the X-Men. I'm very preoccupied with the ordinary people with special abilities. So all these people that I talk about and I depict, they have special abilities that goes against the system to their benefit. The washerwomen I talked about in 1881, the organization and resistance in their campaign was an effing like superpower. They achieved an enormous amount of just being really organized, getting support, being financially stable, because they were building on that front too. So it's just the possibilities of what these people are accomplishing despite what context they're in.
Antonio, is there any resonance with Charlotte Cotton's analogy of photography and magic?
Ooh, I think I can guess a little bit of that, because I've heard her talk multiple times, and it sounds like she uses the word magic too, but I don't recall that specifically. I'm gonna give you an example, and I'll riff off that, because I do think I know quite a bit what you're talking about, but I kind of want to be a little bit more specific.
She says that, you know, if the photographer is like a magician in the sense that you have a very controlled environment, there are traditions that are repeated but innovated on, and that the audience and the perception, you know, a lot of the illusion takes place in the audience, kind of in a way that's analogous to a magic show.
Oh yeah, I totally co-sign that. Yep. And we often talk about that, the dark room. That's where the magic happens. We see the image appear, that they're exposed to light from the larger, you put in the developer and the image comes up and it stops and the fix secures the image. Oh yeah, for sure. So yeah, I'm totally aligned with that. I am the magician, yep. I totally co-sign that. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, it does, especially with the 3D ones, you're spot on, because the stereoscopic images and the active image, the turn like the image is all illusionary effects. Yeah. But for the 3D, but for me though, even though I'm manipulating people and playing with their vision, all that stuff, I still want it to be obvious that I'm doing it. I still want the construct and manipulation to be front and center for them. Like, this is just as you were saying, a trick. And that they all are. Yeah, so for your show, I so what got me to choosing the work I chose for the Academy Art Museum show coming up was that I showed 3D work, so 3D work was accepted in a juried show, but also some of my transfer pieces was in there too. And in between that show and getting offered the residency show a little bit later, or sometime later, I started to dedicate more time to the transfer process. And I started really running the library on that, and this gives me a chance to revisit and retouch up and represent some of these works. I often use exhibitions as, well, I was watching, or what is that? Hey Ben, what is that artist's name that did Ghost in the Shell? Paris Hugh?
Mevish, do you know that one?
He copyrighted he bought the copyright of an anime character. He commissioned other artists to make works for the anime character. And it was about intellectual property. But anyway, Puri, I think his last name is Hyuge, something like that. But he talks about an exhibition actually being the beginning and not the end. And I started to kind of take that on when I started to show more and more since 2016. So every show is an opportunity to kind of revisit and recontextualize in a way of refining the context in the image, not making a whole new one, but zeroing down some more, opening up presentation methods. So I often use my shows as the beginning of something, even though the work is done. It is like the beginning of what the viewer is going to see, or as you talked about, being the magic trick, the show, and if that show needs to be refined for the next time it's going to be up again too. So I'm really looking for, I'm saying all that said, I'm really looking for the Academy Art Museum show to provide another context of how to show and present these works. So these are, I'll go back to the last one, because I'll explain that process. I'll explain this process and I'll go to the next one. It's gonna be not chronological. So this is Pamela of Columbus. This is a portrait of my mother. This photograph portrait of her face, I took when my grandmother passed away. And this is a photograph of her in the limo as we're going to the viewing. And it's a very special photograph to me because she really gave me that photograph. So we've been talking about photographs being given and some photographs being taken. And she really allowed me in that difficult time to just like turn around. I was in the front seat of the limo and just like take that picture with like no conversation. And she just knew, you know, she knew that it's something I needed, and she really encouraged me to take photographs. So this photograph and this image of her is one I have around me quite often because it's a really pivotal time where she showed a remarkable strength. So she is mimicked after Julianne of Norwich, who is a saint who is known for being a humble woman who talked the gospel to ordinary people. This time during the plague, she got the plague and she was bedridden for a couple of weeks. And while she was bedridden, that's when she got her vision from God, and that's where she got her mission to be evangelical. She ended up going to the convent eventually to get away from the plague, to isolate herself, quarantine herself from the plague as well. So Catholic iconography, the iconic figures and the way they're presented in church basilicas is constantly things I'm striving for in the way they're presented, and which is why they are the form they are, as if they're like these casings, and why they're as big as they are. I do want them to be monumental and intimidating. When you walk into, I do want them to tower over you, actually. And actually, quite often, too, depending where I show them, I want them to look too big for the space. I want them to be, depending on where they're shown, figures that the space can't handle, they can't hold. So that's also why this, one of my slide stone was 11 feet tall. When I first showed that one, the wall was like 12 feet tall. Yes, it's Julianne of Norwich. So the process part, going back to the method. So I make inkjet prints. The collection from the boys is at the Library of Congress. I download files. When I work with other images of my own, like the mother's portrait, or images of Julianne of Norwich, which make up the body. That is Julianne of Norwich's cape, her blue cape that she wore in this photograph that I have. So I print them out on inkjet paper, and I put glue on the print, and the glue dries, and that adheres to the ink on the surface. When it dries, I peel it off, so I have some ink on the dried glue, but I also still have ink on the print. So the beginning of this Du Bois work in 2010, 11. Yeah, 11. I was just working with the prints that had the ink removed from the glue. So doing scans and digital manipulations like that. Over the years, I started to accumulate all these copies, these facsimiles on dried glue. And the urgency to, can you go to the, you have any more of the tall portraits you can show? And I'll come back to the oval ones. Or even though, actually go back to the two small people. Okay, then we'll go forward from here. We can pause here. Yeah, right here. And because this is also a transfer piece too, as you can tell, acrylic medium and panel and ink. But the digital work, as much as I like Photoshop, I tend to premeditate a lot and envision the image a lot in my head and have expectations of where it ends up. I kind of wanted to free myself up from that and be more creative and imaginative, but I also wanted to move away from being so strict to the reference, be so strict to the 1900s, 1899 aesthetic of the photograph and the feel. So I still use that, as you can tell from this picture here, but there was definitely a need to reimagine these figures even more, to be more imaginative in how they're being constructed by me. So I have some panels that are going to be, this is one of the works that's up in the Maryland Art Place right now that's being installed. So I did a series of panels and started doing them when the figures of these portraits, which are individual portraits, are together, start to combine and interact with each other. So for the need to be more imaginative and push these figures forward more, I started working with the glued facsimile. Could you go to the next image, please? I started working with the glue facsimile and applying acrylic medium, which is a liquid plastic. You can get a fluid liquid, or you can get a gel. Painters know this stuff very well. They use it way more than I even do in some capacities. It helps for UV protection. It helps with a glossy sheen over it, or you can put a matte sheen on your paintings. It helps preserve it. Glue as a dried piece was not so stable as an end product for presentation. It's too susceptible to humidity, so it'll go liquid again. It'll harden and brittle and break down. So the acrylic medium was a good resolution for sustainable end product to these pieces that I was transferring, getting from the prints. So I coat the ink side of this glue pool with an acrylic medium, or brush it on or pour it on, and I dry, then I soak that piece in water. Since the glue is water-based, it breaks down and the acrylic medium stays together and it holds the ink. So that's how I transfer these digital inkjet prints to acrylic medium. And the acrylic medium, it dries, so there's like a hardened gel. You can think of like egg whites, like an emulsion or a gelatin. So that goes back to the beginnings of photography too. That will hold the soot and the pigments for color transparencies and black and white transparencies. So just another way of using emulsions, liquid that hardens to hold a substrate or hold a material to preserve and sustain an image. I just find a broken down way, a simplified way to do it.
There is such a wide range in the way that you portray these different characters. In some, especially in these tall ones, there are these iconic hovering presences that look down on you, almost like this ethereal apparition. Whereas in some others, you use more vernacular forms like, purse portraits, such as these ones, and yet they still have that really interesting, really fascinating quality in how you portray, in your words, ordinary people with extraordinary abilities. What is your interest in presenting such a wide range to the viewer?
This work here, these oval portraits, were directly influenced by Bertillon, Alphonse Bertillon, and Francis Galton. They both use, Galton used composite portraits to make a typical type, more or less to make stereotypes. He's the founder of eugenics, the cousin of Charles Darwin. So he used composite portraits to make a typical type. So he'll photograph Jewish people and overlap their images on top of each other. Then he'll be like, all right, if your eyes are this far apart, your forehead is this big, then you must be Jewish. So these are typical traits of a Jewish person. or he'll take pictures of criminals and overlap the images on top of each other. It's all right, if you're like, again, if your head's like this big or you have like this feature, then you're prone to like criminality. Galton was, Bertillon, excuse me, was on the opposite end of things. He wasn't interested in making a typical type, but he was more interested in archiving the body. He was interested in police practices. How do we refine police practices so when someone gets arrested, we have a record of them? See, he committed himself to making an archive of the criminal. And he wasn't trying to make a typical type. He was just trying to make a descriptive record, an archive. So if you got arrested, we can keep track of who got arrested and how many times and all these things. Prior to this, in the practice in police practices. And this is where we get ID cards from, like your driver's license with your photo ID from. His technology will become usurped through fingerprinting, but he really started this documentation using photographic means and law enforcement. So this is all from that. And it's hopefully doing the opposite of what Galton's doing. Instead of narrowing down and making a typical type, these figures are these embryonic shapes that are in flux, not in one state or another. They're in between these things. So hopefully the understanding of them is, say it again.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, you go ahead.
I was gonna say sort of an anti-physiognomy of sorts.
Yeah. So this is directly influenced by mid-1800s sociological use or pseudosciences use of photography. So that drove why it's like this. So that's the vernacular one. And I'm just a split brain. Part of it too is that I'm really preoccupied by research and digging into things, but as a person who works in appropriation, it's a sensitive area to be stuck to the reference too much. I had to pay honor to it and be informed by it, and it guides me. But at the same time, I can't be too beholden to it. I have to move it somewhere else. And that's where these collages come in. I have to be more imaginative and surprise myself more and be more thoughtful about putting these connections together that are unexpected. You know, how can I just push myself to be more imaginative and want more other relationship between the photograph and the viewer? I'm scatterbrained. I'm mixed between this right brain person and this left brain person. And that's the juggle in the studio is all the time on the personal front. Outside the medium and the context of the research, me as an individual, I'm just combating refinement and messiness. Being really strict to the content, really feel like I need to know every single fact about something versus like I'm just a person in the studio trying to figure it out. And what happens in the studio is more or less of a practical problem-solving thing. A lot of these moves are made to solve problems, not just be this crazy imaginative person. So it's really just that juggle back and forth between these different sides of me, you know, mm-hmm. that I'm trying to work against or work with. And juggling myself in the studio material helps you kind of throw foils in to figure that out and figure myself out better. So.
As evidenced by your process, which involves a lot of exacting photographs and a lot of almost unexacting glue. Yeah.
The glue is a very important part to me because that starts me off in a various and a curious, unexpected point. Like I start off allowing myself not to be in my head too much, but having to respond to something to feed off that and kind of go back and forth between what I expect and paying attention to what I'm given by the material. And helping me be more creative. This is When Heaven Mourned. These are jacaranda flowers, petals, intermixed with locket-sized portraits of two of my cousins, Angelo Raisin, and his nickname is Raisin, and Kevin. And they both passed away through gun violence. Raisin was murdered in the playground of his apartment complex. He was hanging out with his friends. What I was told was that one of his friends was hanging out with the girl of another guy, and that guy came by the park and opened fire onto my cousin's friend, but my cousin ended up getting killed. My cousin Kevin was murdered through a mugging at a subway station over here as well. And at the time, getting ready for the show, this is for my ICA show, Time and Variation, Demon Variation, excuse me, Demon Variation. And I was listening to the last Nas record came out around that time. Like that week I was working on this. He has a song in there called "Caught Shot the Kid," which is a remake of Slick Rick's children's story. So I was really thinking about my relationship to gun violence in particular, and my history is that it comes from my family, you know, my family's experiences. So when Heaven Mourned, the title comes from a book called 100 Years of Solitude. And when the patriarch dies, the heaven mourned by raining yellow flowers over the town. So I thought that was an interesting, kind of poetic, kind of memorial image for my cousin that passed away. And I was thinking about a true story, which is a song about a kid being killed by the cops after committing a crime and running from them. Nas' songs is a flip on that as well. And also I was reading Ibram Kendi's book, Stand from the Beginning, A Definitive History of Racist Ideas. So that got me all these things swirling and thinking about flowers as an instrument to memorials, my cousins who had experience in this. So, and this is also the first piece that I talk about being in Johannesburg as well, known as Jacaranda City. And when me and my friends who may still be here were in Melville, it's lined with jacaranda trees and the petals all over the streets. So for me, that was like a symbolic, personal, sentimental flower to employ in this. So it's as if the flowers are raining with locket portraits. Jacaranda flowers came into South Africa mid-1800s and through a German botanist. And I believe it started somewhere around Kimberley. And they started to spread. They left the nursery and spread throughout. And it spread so much that it became synonymous with the city. Johannesburg knows Jacaranda City as well, and they're all over Pretoria, the capital as well. But when I was over there, I was told that they're illegal to propagate, even though the synonymous with the city and kind of symbolic to the city. They require too much water for the ecosystem there, the landscape. And thinking about Ibram Kendi's book, Stand from the Beginning, I started thinking about the Negro question around Reconstruction. It's like, what do you do with the free Black people, you know? Their efforts and culture and their bodies and work and their labor is embedded in the land. And so synonymous with the formation of the country, but they weren't citizens, so, you know, what they do. And well, the question was, what do you do with them? Send them back to Africa or enact reparations, which was done a little bit. So the relation between the Jacaranda trees now and the Negro question then that was swirling in my head was kind of came into contact. It kind of started to bump heads or kind of be coupled with each other, kind of lock into each other. It's like these plants are, you know, synonymous with the city, but they're illegal to propagate. You know, there's had this restricted existence. And that felt very synonymous to what the conversation was with Black people at that time as well. Yeah, so that's the full one of When Heaven Mourned. So these are acrylic medium transfer. So these are photographs or inkjet prints. And I put glue on them. I did the whole transfer process, and I supplied them directly to the wall. That was actually, so the shape of that was, I might do a different shape next time actually for the Academy Art Museum show. But the shape of that, it's supposed to make a form of like a waterfall. It's supposed to intentionally draw your eye down, kind of provide some movement. This is personal, it's not connected to the concept of the work, but it all came from my experience of being in Lesotho and seeing that waterfall, which is like my first waterfall. So I kept thinking about this movement down, kind of bringing someone's down, starting up and bringing them down. So that's not really connected to the content of the show, of the piece, but that was a personal anecdote that I just applied to this piece.
Thank you for sharing this very personal piece with us. It says in the credits that it's ongoing. Is this a sort of a transformational piece in response to sort of current events?
No, it's a transformational piece based on my configurations of the piece. I show the piece from floor to ceiling sometimes, or in that shape sometimes. I just reconfigure the amount and the shape of it, that's all.
Okay, next is time and place. Shall we go ahead and see it first?
Sure. I don't know if this is a good idea, but I'm doing it.
So this was a centerpiece of a recent show that you did with fellow Baltimore photographer Jay Gould at the Walters Museum called Time and Place, which addressed the different ways that you two were using historical photography in your practices, respectively, to talk about the present. How was that experience? Can you talk a little bit about how the show and the piece came about? Because around the centerpiece is another installation of yours that has the kind of the suspended gel medium pieces.
Mm-hmm. What was I thinking about for this piece too? Was my first museum show, and I was thinking a lot about, for the piece itself, who I wanted to be in it. So my mother's in this piece, and the cousins I talked about are in this piece. The central piece called The Ruler. My grandmother, who I talked about in the past, image from the viewings in here, some of the boys' figures in here. So I wanted to have them fill up this space too, but I really was responding to like the room. I mean, the reason why this piece is so different from the other ones, especially because it's so transparent, is that I just had to deal with the classism of that room. It's just gorgeous, you know? So I didn't want to have anything that blocked the window, but also through that window is Mount Vernon and a statue of George Washington. So class and power walking into that room was inescapable. So I definitely wanted to make a tall central figure, but I use stoicism as kind of a framework to think about the figure. And I wanted a strong, central, profound figure, but I didn't want it to be one person looking down on people. I kind of wanted to open up and like dissect and fragment the power of the gaze that portraiture often has. So even though it is the ruler, it's a strong central figure, I still wanted that power dynamic to kind of bounce, be more like a ping pong, can bounce back and forth versus solely stay on the tall central figure. You know, you look at the figures that you get the sense that it's following you or something like that, especially if it's towering over you. So I still wanted to have the formal considerations as my other tall portraits, is tall, vertical, you know, entity, but at the same time, unlike the other ones, I didn't want to look down on people because it's already in a room that evoked an immense amount of class and wealth to it. Then on top of that, you have George Washington, a horse right outside the window. So I want all these power dynamics kind of play back and forth with each other. So I opened up what was outside by making the piece probably transparent with the windows as well. So you can see George Washington do this piece. See ordinary people do this piece. So you walk in this room, and there's really ornate woodwork and these gorgeous windows. So I was really preoccupied by, oh, and I'm making portraits busts on the side of the ruler, and Jay Gould's work also invoked quite a bit of eye contact too, because all the viewers is looking straight ahead. So I just wanted to switch up the power dynamics of the gaze a little bit. Instead of everything looking at the viewer, we have something, even if it is towering over them, um, they can implement their gaze on more powerfully than the reverse. So the whole thing is really about power dynamics and kind of open up a relationship versus feeling like closed in or closed down or insignificant, or if you don't match here, you know.
When we were talking
But
about
please,
this body of work in particular earlier, sorry, it's the Zoom dance where we keep going. No, you go. You said that a colleague of yours from the Hamiltonian Fellowship Program in DC had said that they were asking their students about the relationship between history and context. So they asked the students, how do you resolve history with contemporary times and context? And you said something very interesting. You said you did just the opposite. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that?
yeah, that was in regards to Helena. Please excuse me for messing up her last name, but it is important to know her. Helena Mafati. So I'm sorry I butchered her name, but she was a Hamiltonian Fellow for a year when I started. And for her, she's now at Brown University, and she posted an image on her Instagram not too long ago, within a week or so. And a question she proposed to her students, or posed to the students, was how do you reconcile contemporary times with the past? And there were like buttons and pencils and paper you could write your response, and buttons that had statements on them, and just line of conversation as well. And I thought it was really cool and very interesting. And I tried to answer that question for myself, and it was quite a conundrum. I just couldn't find an answer. And the more I thought about it, I realized that I do the opposite. I use history to help me reconcile contemporary times, as I was talking about before, during Reconstruction and so forth. And through our conversation through intersubjective time, something like that. So, and we talk about domestic workers too. So a lot of things that are happening now then are still happening now. Or we talking about, we're talking about references. One of the examples I used in the past, always past focused references. So after Reconstruction, the Black workforce had much more power than they had before. So they can choose to stay at a job or leave a job or do more negotiations and things like that. But there was a big attrition of employees. Employers had a hard time controlling them. So we get issues that were brought up in the document in the 13th and the 13th Amendment, where slavery is abolished except for if you're in prison. So all these laws will come up to imprison people, so he can get a more controlled workforce. Black people in particular, and poor Black people in particular at that. And so one of the things they installed was references. If you had to have a good reference for your previous employer to get your current job. So a lot of disputes that the Black workforce was having with their employers, and they were asserting their autonomy by leaving jobs or negotiating, they wanted to curb that and have more control over the workforce. So they passed. Also, one of the things that happened was references, and that's something we still do today. That's very common and very regular, and something I didn't even thought twice about. But they have roots in something like that. I started to rethink that, oh, a lot of these things that I take for granted, a lot of these practices and laws that is kind of took for granted, didn't think too heavily about. Actually, it was rooted in something quite weaponized.
Antonio, I believe you also have more work in your studio. You were going to show some early work as well as give us a little demonstration of your process.
Oh yeah, well, I'll show you some examples of the process. I didn't get to the water baths, so I'll show some examples of the process of different stages. Okay. Oh yes, when I was talking about the earlier work, I was doing a lot of photo manipulation. And as you can tell, sticking pretty close to the black and white image that I was given too. This is the trickster concealed. So as if the figure can duplicate the background and put it over himself. So having the agency and the power control the way they were depicted in the environment that we're in. And the trickster thing comes from just being in the frame, thinking about the photograph as a confined space, but how do you use the components within that space against itself or to your own means? So at the time, I was really excited about the challenge of only using what was in the photograph to rearrange itself and open up the conversation more as opposed to kind of restricting it down. You confuse people. This one right here, there's a glare there. I hope you can see it okay. But this is the figure that has been duplicated and flipped horizontally and overlapped with itself. And this is the one that really got me thinking about the 3D images. Because this is the, I created this image with the aim to, for the viewer to look at it as if they're cross-eyed, to introduce that look for them. So this is really, I really started thinking about the physicality of seeing and how to really understand it alters people's vision, even if it's like a low-tech, simple 3D glasses way, which actually helps a lot because one thing about the stereoscopic images and why they're shown so much and requested to be exhibited so much, because a wide group of people really connect to them because of the accessibility of its low techness and the commonality of 3D images. And kids in particular start liking them a lot. So I show the 3D images quite a bit in schools and educational institutions, which is also a big part of my practice as well, where I show these works and what works I show in certain places. So showing at schools and nonprofits, donating my work to charities is a part of the mission of the work too. It's a part of the studio work also. Especially when you think about Reconstruction, how the telling of Reconstruction is so crafted, manipulated. So again, the 3D images. Excuse me, okay, be there? Okay. Some of the first ones, I know it's a glare, so please excuse me. Two smaller ones, some of the first ones I did. Good, good, okay, great. This one right here, that one. First one I did, I just brushed glue on it. And that also started to give me, this one started the whole thing because it looked like the figure was moving in the photograph. When you look at your hand at night under a spotlight, you see the echoing of your hand. So that got me thinking about movement and what if he did that within the photograph himself. So this really started this whole train of thought. And this one, the glue sat on this for 3 months. So this started like the material experimentality of it all, seeing the black dots there, which are air bubbles where the ink did not stick to the glue. So this one pushed like the imaginative concept of the work, and this one pushed like the material methods of the work early on.
It looks like from a very, very early stage even, you were taking a very sort of historically oriented and almost exhausted medium and doing something new with it, which was an idea that was central to going back to Charlotte Cotton and her academic work on the history and culture of photography, and a very groundbreaking symposium that was organized at SF MoMA in 2010, which was appropriately titled, "Is Photography Over?" They reached a consensus that photographers like yourself can always take this kind of seemingly omnipresent medium and do something new with it. What are some of your sort of layered incentives other than sort of exploring the idea of identity and reconstruction through photography?
Can you ask the question again?
Yeah, I guess I asked it in a roundabout way. How much are you thinking about the medium of photography and how much are you thinking about this reconstruction separately? So in other words, is medium the message?
Medium is the message, for sure. But fully what that message is right now, I can't tell you exactly all of it. I can tell you some of it as it unravels. But yeah, for sure, it's definitely about yeah, definitely about the medium. And I just intertwined it all. I intertwined the medium. It was of that period, what was going on in that period. Then my personal curiosities with the origins of photography regarding materiality and chemicals, and just the basic mechanical principles of this copying. You know, I didn't want to spare, break things down and get to like the simplest form of it. The simplest form of photography is just facsimile, just copying, really. And how to also articulate it is, daguerreotypes, Van Dyke Brown, cyanotypes, we can just go, camera to see that, you can put that in there. That's just tracing. I mean, I just put that all in the pot. Also, when I talked about the ruler in the past too, is also to talk about a photograph's life as well, and not just presented as pristine, refined object, but as an object that it is organic, it can be organic, it is an organic material that's subjected to light and humidity and temperature, and it also exists in multiple states. So the battle I have too is that one is a point of refinement when I did with the 2D work a great deal, but there's also a great deal of looseness when I did with collage works. I'm still opening up to the organics of the material of the photograph. It's not always pristine, but it can deteriorate and turn colors and change its physical state. One of my first jobs in college, I was an archive assistant for Volkmar Wenzel, who was a retired National Geographic photographer at the time. And he had a collection of National Geographic transparencies ending at 1960 and going to early 1900s. And they were suffering from acetate syndrome. And that's when the emulsion on the transparency shrinks, it changes, it deteriorates at a different rate than the substrate, than the plastic it's on. And it's a contagious condition. It spreads to other transparencies, it gives out the vinegar smell and it turns yellow, and the emulsion starts to become brittle and breaks down. So if you ever seen egg whites dry in a counter and they harden and they get like brittle, it's just like that. So I have an experience, and at the time I was in the dark room too. And I was in college, I was learning color photography and digital photography, and I'm quite scatterbrained. And I think I have a certain capacity to handle all these different ideas, regardless if they make sense or not. So I just put it all in the pot. It's like, I don't see the need to deny the organics of the photograph. It exists in all these different states. So I'm able to work within all these different states. And I think it can evolve different understanding of what the medium is, what it can offer you. Was that can be considered a living, breathing thing as well. I guess ideas are like that as well, aren't they? So it's kind of intertwined with me, yeah, really. I separated as far as like, when I read certain books about, Reconstruction, I'm kind of focused on policies and laws and people's lives and stories, and connecting a timeline, economic timeline, from then to now. But certain texts that I'm preoccupied with, like the Du Bois show, it's hard to deny that photography is intertwined and inseparable from the content itself too. So.
Antonio, I think we'd like to ask people to ask you some questions if they have them in the Q&A window, and we'll select a few. I'd like to ask you about Frederick Douglass, who was very conscious of his own, image, and portraiture is one of the most portrayed Americans of the 19th century, and he's obviously from Talbot County, so it's special relevance here. But and you cite some of his writings on photography in some of your writing as well. Can you talk about Frederick Douglass?
Yeah, I'll how do I phrase this? I don't focus on Douglass that much, not for any particular reason. If I cited him, I probably wasn't sure. So I'm really curious about what you learned. But for the Douglass himself, he just understood that photographs and images were propaganda tools as well. Mm-hmm. So for him, it's like, I'm getting my photograph taken X amount of time so they can see a Black person like me. This is propaganda as well. They need to see something like this. They need to foil to what they usually see. And a lot of activists at that time, profound and prominent people understood that. And then you have to think about the literacy rates at that time too. They weren't as high. So a lot of people understood news and current events and newspapers through imagery. I keep thinking about North Carolina's image campaign to stop Blacks from voting and how they depicted, Black people and stuff like that. So imagery representation and how we consider them and how it influences laws and policies, it's all intertwined. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I'm gonna get more into Douglass. I've been meaning to get more into Douglass. I have that book on my list and all that thing. So I'm really glad you put it up because he's someone that's in my periphery, but I haven't really focused on too much, but I hope to.
Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A for all of our attendees. Mevesh, do you have any other questions for Antonio?
Yeah, I wanted to see what you were reading and looking at these days. Obviously, with the quarantine, all artists' modes of producing have changed rapidly, especially those doing historical work or sourcing images from the historical work. How are you adapting to this new time?
Oh, I'm cool. I'm good. I like being inside. This is the first time in some time that I don't have my regular job to continue with. I can just be at home and make work. I mean, I'm a teacher, so summers are like that. But being quarantined now, in particular, not really leaving the apartment, I slowed myself down a lot and just focused on the work. I tend to move quite fast, so this is a really fruitful time for me to kind of slow down and just revisit things. Like I said before, I overproduce for shows quite a bit, so all these fragments of things that had promises of potential, now I can flesh that out. So I feel like this is really much needed time for myself. Yeah, it's
I've
really
got a question from Heather Harvey, who you know, and is an artist and has had a show at the Academy. Heather says, "Thank you for a fantastic talk. Du Bois has been a big influence in your work. Wondering if you're also thinking of his idea of double consciousness, especially for your stereoscopic works. And sorry if you've already mentioned this. I've had technical difficulties from the beginning." So.
Yeah, that's definitely in the play, and that was really the impetus in the beginning that started it all. So was the Black folks in particular, because that spoke to me personally. I was at Morgan State right after high school, and we read that for one of my classes. And the way that he spoke to the individual, despite biological sex and race and the environment in which one lives, who are you? Like, how do you define yourself amidst all of this stuff? And that really spoke profoundly to me. Stereotypes from both ends, from expectations of Black people and expectations of white people, is something I've been on my mind and I've ping-ponged back and forth with throughout my life. It always comes back to, like, yeah, despite all that, there's expectation for me to act a certain way and be a certain way based on the demographic I'm in, either a part of or that's dominant around me. But despite all that, who am I though? Like, what am I really interested in? What do I care about? And he really drove that in that text. So it really comes back to all this. I'm really preoccupied by Black history, but I can't really escape that. So it's my experience, and that context is implemented on me as well. So I feel the need to understand and speak through that. But it's all about the individual. It's all just, who are you? Despite all these racial and sexual and gender, economic expectations and standards.
I wanted to ask you about—
And that comes back to the trickster too. To understand who you are, you have to understand your environment and context. You don't understand your environment and context, you're understanding what you agree with, what you don't agree with. You decide what you're going to work with and what you're not going to work with. So it all comes back to this being this foil for your own means, right? For your own self-sufficiency.
I have a question here from Joe Minerick. Why produce digital C-prints? C-prints are known to be unstable. Why not more contemporary printing processes?
I do that too. I do contemporary printing processes. Some of the reason why I do C prints, I used to work at the place I produced the prints. So I feel confident in their ability and the archivalness of these prints, which is said to last at least 99 years. That's a lot of what my company talked about, what Fuji talked about. So I know the place in particular is specific to me. But I moved away from that, started doing more electric stuff. But part of that was I worked at the place I got to produce, but also was a cost thing. I had to produce. I wanted images to be a certain size. So starting out and not having much money, it's like, all right, so do I compromise on the size, or do I print them all myself and do these Lester Epson prints, which are gorgeous too. So initially, I felt confident in the place I was producing. It was a cost thing, produced 20, 24 by 36s, versus 30 11 by 14s or something like that, or 60 by 20. So I just made those decisions based on practicalities and my compliments of where they were getting produced.
Nice. A question from Connor Dorbin. Do you have installations that are technically more challenging to install than others?
Yeah, we saw it's all shot from the Walters Art Museum, the Unmaking and Making busts that were hanging. There was a bigger installation of that at the Willon Mansion at Pope Leahy House in Alexandria, Virginia, I think a couple years ago. And yeah, that was really tricky. So it was displayed in the music room, which is the tallest ceiling is in that house because it's the entertainment room. George Washington's old property that he gifted to his nephew, which eventually got taken over by Quakers as well. And Burnham was established around that. And so that entailed, there's a harp in that room, which is why I brought the music room. So that helps figure out the installation of it all. Really, the figures were hanging from monofilament, or on monofilament strings coming up and down, vertical. Then from one end of the wall to the other end of the wall were, how many cords? 6 cords going from one end to the other monofilament, in which those busts would hang from. So I kind of want to play back with the harp, going back and forth. So hanging all those different, and those were 90 busts, and each string hanging down, I think, if I remember correctly, had about 6 or 7, something like that. And the restriction for that, since it's an old house, we couldn't add any new holes in the walls. So there's a window here, like me, I'm facing the window.
Did you show that
the wall here on the side, and the wall on the other side, and all I had was like one hole to use on each side because they had framed pictures installed, portraits. So I had to hang like all these lines on like 2 holes. It was like bonkers. And I got them to work around it. I convinced them that I knew what I was doing, and like, this provides so much support if there's only 2 holes. But that was a challenge. That was a mess. Yeah. And so the room itself, the length of the room. So I think the length of the room itself was like 20 feet. And I think the height was, or was that about right? Yeah, something like that. And the height was like, let me say the height was like 25, 30, something like that. Give or take, give or take. Yeah, so just to give you an idea of scale. And they were hung from the window. So the light from outside influences and changes the tint of the transfers, because it's semi-transparent as well. So it plays on, that's it.
There's a stained glass quality to that installation, kind of fragmented stained glass, which is a lot of your work has a kind of a sacred connotation as well.
Yeah. I try to borrow a lot of that mood from churches and the contemplativeness, the quietness,
the icon,
and the kind of profound presence of these beings and stuff like that. I try to sample a lot of those moods, those tones, when I install the work or when I make the work. Yeah.
Constance Del Nero, who is our Director of Children's Education and Community Programs, asks, I have a question about your use of the petals in the work that includes photos of your cousins. This work reminds me of a work by Nick Cave I saw at Mass MoCA. Initially, it was so beautiful with sparkly images hanging from the ceiling, and one looked more closely and noticed that the pretty sparkly images were guns. Did you mean to have this kind of contrast? Also, did you use real petals or photos of petals? If the previous, it's a multi-layered.
Photos of
if the previous, do you think the glue coating will preserve the petals long term? And finally, how archival is the glue process?
The glue won't preserve them. That's why they transfer to acrylic medium. That would help. That is made for UV resistance. And depending on how much you put on, how thick the medium is, it does turn yellow initially. Then it eventually will stop. That's interesting to work with too. That's kind of cool to control how it's tint based on how much you put in. But the conservation part and glue being unstable is the main reason why I switched over to acrylic medium. I can get all these transparency properties, and I respond to the environment based on humidity. So if it's warm out, the medium starts to loosen up and flex, or pull, stretch itself, depending on how heavy the piece is. And when it gets colder, it contracts itself and comes back. So it kind of changes its form. And I just wanted to play off that too. But it's still stable. I have my first collage I made in 2016, looks just like it did now that it did then. So I'm very impressed with the stability of acrylic medium. And when I first started this work in grad school, using glue to cast my dad and have a physical representation of him in Philly when he was in Baltimore. Glue was the main thing, but through critiques and actually through critiques of other people's feedback, they're like, this isn't a stable end product. And one person said, Darcy Alexander, who's a curator, said it was another attractive one. I was like, good point. Let's figure it out. There's some other questions in there. I'm not sure if I answered them, but let me know if I did not. I can.
Heather. Oh.
Ask Marianne Schindler question. She says, you referenced Huigi, which calls to mind the human mask. I think she's referring to the artist who used the anime characters. Is that correct?
Oh, Ghost in the Shell?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
She remarks, this calls to mind the human mask. And Heather Harvey says, there's one last question if there's time. What are those rectangular samples hanging below your current work? Just curious.
Okay. Let me go to the human mask one. Maybe can you elaborate more what they mean by the human mask? Are they talking like saving face, like putting up a front, or are they talking about a veil, or?
Marianne, could you please elaborate on your question? Let's see if she says, does the notion of the mask inform your portraits?
Like the mask in general. Not particularly the mask per se. Appearance is clearly a big part of it, but not the mask. Yeah, not like a mask covering or anything. No. And you said
Heather Harvey asked what the rectangular samples they look like color swatches that hang behind you between the two rows of work.
Okay, yeah. They are salt samples. I'm growing salt and I'm studying salt. There's a really awesome episode of how it's made, salt. You can find on YouTube. And it's profound material, but it's definitely one that persists in photography. It's a very significant medium for photography, especially the beginning of it. So I was doing tests with salt on surfaces, growing salt, foam core. Eventually I'm gonna get to collaging pieces with salt. I'm working on, so the domestic workers series, I'm working on making like photo installation sculpture type stuff. Dealing with the home and domestics. You know, I'm dealing with domestic workers. So I've been thinking a lot about clothespins and my clothes and stuff I have around the house. I'm in the house all the time, and I'm a girl salt. So I'm very much curious about, you know, common materials I've been implementing in here. So I'm gonna make some collages with some grown salt on them. And these are my experiments of growing salt and applying the materials and see how they affix themselves. Grinding salt or using a salt whole. This is charcoal salt, Hawaiian black salt. This is Hawaiian red salt. This other one here is Himalayan salt. This is gorgeous. This is like crystal salt. So they come out as like pyramids, almost like 3D printed pyramids. You can see all the individual lines that builds up to a thing. I don't know if any of this is interesting to look at.
Cool.
Send it to the lens.
Antonio, I have a question for you. Thinking about what you were saying just a little earlier, do you do any self-portraiture? And you know, you deal with fragments and shards and reconstructions and collages. Where do you locate yourself in your work?
I used to do a lot of self-portraiture. That was like the main thing. College and grad school. That's part when I stopped. Actually, I stopped doing self-portraits when I started doing this. Actually, I was doing self-portraits all the time. I look at myself in there by making these people like surrogates for myself. You know, they having abilities that I don't have, and I can imprint myself onto them and just say they like they represent me, like the trickster and the magician in particular. Some of the titles I give the figures to are reminiscent of family members. They look like family members. Just something about them reminds me of them. Like Sandra, for example. There's another one called Sidel, after my grandmother, who I mentioned, was passed away. Yeah, so I just, I mean, as you go back to the beginning of the talk too, this all started out as like a personal investigation of my family and stuff. So I kind of just interject them in there. This is a medium one, 2 people. So a lot of material experiments. This is all going towards working on a washerwoman, you know, figuring out how to depict them, you know.
There's so much exciting work seen in major institutions right now about identity and representation in photography and painting. Titus Kafar, Ken Gonzalez, Jordan Castile are just same names that come to mind. How do you see this artistic landscape expanding, and do you have any sort of future project after the domestic workers and the women's suffrage movement that you are developing?
Yeah, I'm also working on a show for the Wesley Theological Seminary at the beginning of next year. That's a residency also in a show, and I'm showing more of my religious work there. So these tall portraits reminiscent of these icons, these Christian icons. But I'm also making a window installation commission about Black educators and administrators of the seminary as well throughout its years also. So that's currently what I'm working on. And I think that's like a 6-panel. I think each panel is around 3 feet in the window, in addition to an exhibition in the gallery and a portrait of my grandmother that's going to be installed in the main church right behind the altar. Yeah, because that's reminiscent of the shot in Turin and all that stuff. Um, you know, I'm not sure where it's gonna go. I do for yeah. Well, I'll say for like what's being made. You know, I can't predict that, but I do think that Black people and non-binary individuals and white people and Latin individuals are just gonna work more together, even if it's in their own like pockets, in their own crews, or collectively. I just see a lot of communication and collaboration going on. I go to some Zoom talks and these panels, and the artists you talked about, from what I can tell, seemingly know each other or in a circle together. Um, and what's happening in Baltimore over the years too, there's been a lot more collaboration between specific demographics, especially non-binary community here. They've been really active. It's been really amazing. So I think more people actually just kind of collaborate and come together. As far as like where the works go, I don't know, but that seems to be the trend. And people, especially young people, seem to be more critical these days too, which I appreciate. Like like I said, I don't know these people, but when I look at that scene up there, it seems like there's a network that's circling around each other. You know, so that's really exciting to see. I see it getting more critical. I see people getting more critical. Yeah.
Well, Antonio, we're excited to have you out in Easton, Talbot County in August. And your show Legacy, which we've seen some of the works in it here, will be on display in the museum. And we're just really excited to have you as our third artist in residence. And it's going to be great.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for this.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time and the opportunity. Yeah. And everyone who decided to attend today.
Thanks, everyone. If you can't wait to see Antonio's work, you can order the New Photography 1 catalog, which at least, and our development team, especially our development manager, Jennifer Chuzanowski, works very hard at launching a museum store. You can find it at academyartmuseum.square.site, where you can order the catalog, or you can email me. Antonio, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful opportunity for us to take a deep dive into your work, and we really, really look forward to hosting you.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Antonio.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.